And joining us tonight is Frank Alcock, a candidate in the U.S. Florida Senate race, and he is also a political science professor at New College of Florida. Rod Thompson, the president of the Sarasota Republican Club, and political analyst Jeffrey Ornstein. Gentlemen, thank you all for coming up. So it's been a kind of a slow week in Florida politics.
Indeed.
Marco Rubio is really doing what he said earlier he would not do. He is going to be running for re-election. He says that he is doing this after the Orlando shootings, and that it is really important for him to have a voice in terms of what goes on in the U.S. Senate. He has said a number of things over the last couple of days. Let's talk about a little bit after we watch Rubio saying the challenge ahead of him running on a ticket where Donald Trump is the Republican nominee.
And I most certainly hope it's not her. You're still going to have a U.S. Senate. And if the majority of the senators in the Senate are Democrats, and Hillary Clinton, God forbid, is elected president, she is going to get a blank check. The last time we had that situation was 2008 to 2010, and it produced Obamacare and Dodd-Frank and the stimulus and all sorts of other damage to this country. And so I have a chance to make a difference in that regard.
He is running in quite a different atmosphere than he did when he first ran for election 6 years ago. It was a three-way race then. Charlie Crist running as an independent. Now it is going to be a Republican versus a Democrat in the presidential year, where Democratic turnout is at its peak. Rod, you know, I know that you're going to be supporting Rubio, but is this a harder race for him in your opinion?
It could be. It could be. And the reason why I say it could be is because of what you stated there. It's a presidential election. It's always harder to run as a Republican in Florida during a presidential year statewide, because the turnout's higher on the Democrat side in a presidential election year than it is in an off year. When he was first elected, it was an off year. So in that respect, it could be harder. However, I think that looking at his opponents on the Democrat side, I think Alan Grayson probably, I can't see the Democrats nominating him, although I would love that.
We're gonna be taking a look at that race in a couple minutes. But
he's still an opponent in the primary. Last time I checked, Carlos Proof.
We're going to get to that also in a moment. But you know, on the Democratic side, Grayson is really only a couple of points behind Patrick Murphy.
Yeah.
One last poll I saw.
Right.
Right.
Let me ask you this. Do you take him at his word that his decision was based upon the need for him in the Senate in the wake of the Orlando shooting, or is it something that was reported in the New York Times that he told colleagues and advisors that he would like to run for president again in either 2020 or 2024, but he became increasingly came to think that doing so by being a private sector or a private citizen would be just too difficult?
Oh, well, at the risk of straddling the fence, I would guess it's both. He had a lot of pressure on him from the Republican establishment to run again now, because without Rubio in this race, I think that this looked very difficult as a seat for the Republicans to keep. With Rubio, that flips it to where it's a more likely keep than a more likely loss before him. So he had pressure, just like Paul Ryan had pressure to become Speaker. He had a lot of people telling him, for the good of the party, for the good of the country, you have to do this, you have to do this. Now, the fact that that might dovetail into future presidential plans running from the Senate as opposed to you know, a big-time lawyer or something, that probably makes sense too. Rubio's no dummy.
But it's been no secret that Rubio wanted to run for president for years now, and the knock against him during the Florida presidential primary was that he was somehow disconnected from his constituency here in Florida. We talked to some Republican mayors who had never met him, and
He's
so
disconnected from a lot of people. I don't think it's a mystery. I find it hard to believe that Marco Rubio views serving in the United States Senate as an honor. It's more of a chore for him. I think he is, you know, he has high aspirations, he has higher goals, and I think that he thinks the next opportunity that it comes up, he's better placed right back in the Senate. But I don't think he's excited to go back there.
in either case, as we're about to see, he does believe that this is going to be a harder race than it was last time.
There's no question about that.
I'm going to work hard to be reelected, and if it works out, I'll do it with honor. I'll do it with a lot of hard work and with enthusiasm, and that's the direction I think it will end up. And if it doesn't, my kids will still love me, and so will my wife, and we'll go back and continue to live our lives in the greatest country in the world. But we're going to win.
Jeffrey, what's your take?
Well, my take is that I agree with Rod, by the way, that there had to have been heavy Republican national pressure on him. But he's always been a very ambitious politician, and he's made no bones about the fact that he has presidential ambitions. When he was in the Florida House of Representatives, he was already talking about running for the U.S. Congress. And as soon as he got in the U.S. Congress, before his term was 2/3 up, he was already a candidate for president. So.
One more area I want to get to before our first break is the fact that, hey, most of the Republican field has dropped out, but not our own Carlos Barouf.
Right.
He is staying in this race, and he is painting himself as the outsider and the Rubio, the creature of Washington. Here is what Mr. Barouf had to say.
The limelight. And it has nothing to do with what's good for Florida citizens, and all to do with his future and what is his best interest.
Rod, what's your take here in terms of Mr. Barouf's position right now? Does he have much of a chance?
In the primary, I just don't think he probably does. However, with Todd Wilcox just dropping out this afternoon, who was the other, right, the other outsider businessman in it. So it's just a two-person race, and one, he can paint Rubio as an insider who does what Washington says, has higher aspirations, etc. So he can do that. But for Carlos, I think, and I have not talked to him, but for Carlos, I think this is also an opportunity to really show who he is statewide and create some of that name recognition, where even if he loses in the primary, he has now elevated his stature and his name around the state of Florida.
We're going to continue this conversation, but before we do so, we'll be back in just a moment. We are talking about the U.S. Senate race and Marco Rubio's re-entry into Florida politics. And Jeffrey, let me continue with you. And I know that the latest polls show that Marco Rubio is up about 7 points.
7 points over Murphy and 8 points over Grayson at the moment.
But could there be any hangover effect from the presidential primary where Donald Trump...
If you, I took a look at the polls, and I am a firm believer in looking at the broad sweep of the polls and not any given sample. And I saw that 2 days ago, when they were polling this, he was up by 2%. He being Rubio, and I think this is a bump because he announced that he's gotten a lot of press coverage. But I think he's going to have a tough primary with Carlos Barouf, and I think he's running in a bad year. For a Republican in a state like Florida. So
Rod, you're connected to the Republican political establishment here. Does he have a lot of fence mending to do?
In the Republican Party here in Sarasota? I don't think so. Not in Sarasota, Manatee. With Rubio, yeah, there's some fence mending there. I think because there were some issues there. I mean, there are a lot of people here for Jeb, actually. And the fact that, as was stated earlier, Rubio has this reputation for being a bit aloof from the state of Florida and all, that is probably his weakest point. And frankly, running a Democrat campaign against him, that would be his weakest point. But I think he can get that done because he's so attractive on so many other levels that the weaknesses he has are not major weaknesses.
Frank?
And I wouldn't rule out Carlos Barouf just yet. I mean, yeah, let's just remember that it's been no secret that Carlos is running as a second coming of Donald Trump, and Trump crushed Marco Rubio. I mean, almost 2-1 in this state. And so with the field is now cleared, the governor of the state just gave him the nod. He's not endorsing Rubio. That's pretty much a default endorsement for Carlos Barouf. With that, you know, if that replays, yeah, I mean, it's possible for Rubio to lose again twice.
that's a good point, by the way, because this is a Republican primary electorate. Again, we're not talking about the general electorate. Rubio is going to have to face an entirely different electorate in November. But the electorate in August is very similar to the one that in the presidential primary.
If
so
Carlos
I wouldn't rule out
comes
Barouf either.
Close, I mean, he can self-finance. He's going to have to get it. But if he presents himself as the Florida version of Trump.
Nobody in Jacksonville or Miami has any idea who this Barouf guy is, and they all know who Rubio is.
Actually, he has been spending a great deal of money in those markets.
But you saw that last poll. He was at 5%. And his name recognition was either 13 or 17% name recognition.
But in what was a crowded Republican field,
right. So he's got a couple
of
months to catch up with a presidential contender.
Let's talk about the Democratic side of things for a while. The polls between Patrick Murphy and Alan Grayson have been tight over the long haul, but it's been really no secret that the Democratic Party has had its thumb on the scale. You had President Obama and the Vice President endorsing Patrick Murphy. And just this week, Patrick Murphy was the subject of a pretty serious investigative report out of CBS in Miami, where they questioned his professional resume, showing that he, despite what he said, really did not work as a CPA, did not get dual degrees from the University of Miami. It looks like he's on the defensive right now. And, you know, Jeffrey, does Alan Grayson have any real shot?
Yes, I think he does. The Democratic Party has been, for a variety of circumstances, has been inching to the left. And I think Alan Grayson on the left wing of the Democratic Party of Florida has a significant constituency. And Murphy's issues, and I did see that report in Miami, but there's also a lot of people who are upset with him for his opposition to All Aboard Florida for financial reasons. I think that he is not a shoo-in.
You know, I remember seeing Alan Grayson say or boast that progressives in Florida would walk over hot coals to vote for him. You know, on the other hand, you've had Harry Reid, the Democratic minority leader in Washington, basically say to him at a Democratic meeting, "I want you to lose."
Yeah. This is a rerun. In some respects, it's different than the Bernie and Hillary race, but the establishment has lined up on behalf of Murphy. He's been raising an obscene amount of money. They view him as probably the best matchup in a general election. Grayson has a lot of progressive support. I don't think Democratic voters have totally tuned in just yet, and so I do think this is going to be a close race. And I think, you know, we'll know as we get closer. Maybe we won't know to Election Day, but I agree with Jeff. Yeah, Alan Grayson has a chance.
You're talking about a primary here, and again, I emphasize
A
that the
primary
primary
in the middle
electorate
of
is
August,
different.
where voter turnout is not going to be
Right.
high.
And a committed group of progressives can have an exaggerated impact in an electoral turnout like that.
I would be very surprised if the Democrat Party primary voters in Florida elected somebody who is so far left in Alan Grayson and who has said some explosive things
As
in the
we have
past.
seen in this election cycle,
have.
what the party wants doesn't necessarily mean what the party gets, if you look at the Republican side.
Right, but in the Democrat side, it does mean that.
Democratic. Thank you.
Capital D.
Well, the other thing about that is that what are the chances in terms of the Democrats retaking the seat? The Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee already booked $10 million worth of ads come in the fall. One way or the other, I would expect this is going to be a pretty competitive race.
I think it's going to be played out between the 48 and the 52-yard line. I think it'll be very close, but
Absolutely.
the Democrats have a very good chance.
I was going to say 51-49.
And Rod, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, it's going to be close because it's Florida, but I think Rubio completely changes the scenario.
But what impact does the presidential race have on that? Because it is going to be very close there.
You saw what Rubio's statement was. I mean, he said he had to run because he had to be a stop on Clinton, and he wasn't all that comfortable with Trump. So he is clearly separating himself from both in running in Florida.
And that will have to be the last word. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us.